Are all overdrive pedals basically the same? No, they're not. This is something that I've seen over and over in guitar gear groups, whether it's a Facebook group that talks about guitar gear or just other gear forums in general, where some people will say that all overdrives are all the same thing, basically. And they might even point to a schematic that says, see, look, it's just a tube screamer. Well, I thought it might be a fun video where we sort of dispel that myth that even if the pedal schematically looks like a tube screamer, it can sound completely, totally different. So let's put that to the test. First of all, let's talk about how some pedals do sound just alike, even though they have different names. And let's run through a few of those so we can prove that. We're going to start with the Tube Screamer right here. So as you can hear, they all pretty much sounded the same. I may have had the dials set a little bit differently, but overall, those particular pedals were all based around just sort of a stock tube screamer sort of thing. But let's take another example. So we have the Boss OD3, I have the TS9 here just to compare it, and let's try these. I think you'll find that the OD3 is going to sound completely different because it's not based on the same circuit, and it's not voiced the same, and it's not supposed to be the same at all. So as you probably heard, the OD3 is a little bit more woolly, a lot more bottom end, not as many mids as the TS9 or the Tube Screamer circuit. And it's just really, even though it's an OD3, it's an overdrive. It's, I mean, Boss is a little weird because they have OD1, they have the OD2, they have the OD3, and all are completely different circuits. And the SD1, oddly enough, is closer to a Tube Screamer than any of the ODs. And there'll be some comments about the OD1. I would disagree that it's not a Tube Screamer. And now for the super nerd portion of the video. Let's talk about what's going on with the circuits of this. Now, I know many of you watching this probably don't really understand how schematics work, how to read them, that sort of thing. So I'm not going to go into hyper nerd level, just sort of super nerd level. So I'll make this sort of in a explain it like I'm 5 sort of way. Let's look at this. So basically this is the stock TS808 circuit. We have a buffer. You don't absolutely need a buffer for this type of circuit, but it's on this Tube Screamer. Does it change the sound? Maybe a little tiny bit, but not that dramatic. That's going into a non-inverting op amp. That's not important. It's just a gain stage that has the diodes within that gain stage. Then we have some filtering. So we're taking off some high end here. Then a tone control, which does 2 things. As you raise the tone control up, it's going to increase the treble. As you lower it down, it creates another low-pass filter. So it creates more filtering of the highs as you turn it down. And then we just go into a volume control, standard old volume control. And then on the Tube Screamer, there's yet another buffer. Now, whenever they made the Tube Screamer, it's electronic switching. So you had to use buffers in it. I mean, really, to make it work right, you had to have buffers. So there really wasn't a very good option if they were going to use electronic switching to not put buffers in it, which is why you tend to see a lot of those types of pedals have buffers at the front and the beginning, or at the front and the end rather. Now let's look at the OD1 circuit. Now there's a bunch of things on here that we didn't have on the last, and that is the electronic switching. So we're going to ignore that because that doesn't really do a whole lot with the sound. So we're going to ignore that part. What you have is, again, a buffer. Like I said, you have to with the electronic switching. We still have a similar type of gain stage, first gain stage. We do have that. There is no low pass filtering here. There is no tone control. Instead, there's another type of low pass filter that's just sort of stuck. It's no tone control. You just take off some highs and it is what it is. That goes into a level control and then it goes to another buffer to the output. So is it like a Tube Screamer? Maybe kind of, sort of, but it's definitely not exactly like. Now the OD2, this is totally different. So again, we have a buffer at the input, but our signal splits into two different things. So we have more of a distortion type of circuit. These are called discrete op-amp stages. So we're using transistors and FETs rather than like a little chip. So we have one there. We have a bunch of filtering right here. We have yet another one of those discrete op-amp stages. And then we have yet some more filtering. And then we go into a tone control and a volume control. Now this tone control, completely different than the Tube Screamer, totally different. It's just pretty much just a passive thing. So rather than the Tube Screamer, which actively boosts those treble frequencies, this one just takes off highs depending on where you have the knob set. But I said the signal splits. So it goes this way on one, and then it also goes this way on another, which is more of the overdrive sort of thing. So on the overdrive side, we still have this discrete op-amp stage. Now it does have these diodes that are soft clipping in sort of the same way as you would have at the Tube Screamer, but that is not really exclusive to a Tube Screamer. That's basically just standard textbook soft clipping with diodes. So this is not like anything that was, I would say, was invented by the Tube Screamer, maybe popularized. That might be a little bit more accurate, but it's pretty standard stuff. We have some more filtering there, and then after that filtering, our signal goes out back into that same tone control and the volume control. And then, of course, on the end, there's a buffer. Now let's take a look at the OD3. Now this is, yet again, something completely different. We have a buffer, but then we have yet another buffer. We have some filtering and stuff going on a little bit, not anything crazy, but so we have a buffer into a buffer. And then we have this stage here, which is actually going to kind of create a little mid dip. And then we have a discrete op-amp stage yet again. And those diodes right there that are doing the soft clipping. And then we change ways completely. We part ways, and we're now going to go into a FET, a JFET actually. And we're going to, that's going to boost the signal up, and we're going to use the feedback, so it's sort of like a feedback loop here, and we're going to soft clip with diodes with the JFET, which is not something you see a whole lot of, but it is a way to do it. It's sort of similar to what you find on a big muff, where they're using diodes there to clip the signal, but that's in a transistor. So a little bit different way, but sort of similar. So we go from there into some more filtering, and then that's just basically a big EQ stage, more or less. A little bit of gain, but more or less just shaping the overall EQ. And then we go into passive tone control and a level control. And of course, like every Boss pedal, another buffer on the output to make the electronic switching here play nice and work well together. Now I mentioned the SD1, ironically enough, that actually does look the most like a Tube Screamer. So here's the SD1 right here. We have the input buffer, of course. We have a very similar type of gain stage, but we do have an extra diode instead of like the Tube Screamer, which just has two. This has three, creating asymmetrical clipping. Basically just means that the clipping texture is a little bit less compressed, I would say, and just a little bit more jagged, so not quite as smooth. We have another low-pass filter just like a Tube Screamer. We have, as far as topology goes, same type of Tube Screamer tone control, just different values, so it sounds different. So it's cutting and boosting different frequencies. We go into a volume control. We go into an output buffer. So topology-wise, they look very similar. They don't exactly sound the same. There are mods you can do to make them sound the same. Got a video on that in case you're wondering. But overall, I mean, the SD1 actually looks more like a Tube Screamer than any of the other Boss ODs. The OD3 is a little bit, it's a cool thing. It's a little more woolly, like I said, and not anything like a Tube Screamer. Let's try something else. So we have the Soldano Super Lead Overdrive. Now this is, I would say this is kind of an overdrive going into a distortion. It's pretty much intended on having sort of a Soldano sound into more like a clean amp. So keep that in mind. And it's nothing like a Tube Screamer circuit, but let's do a comparison since this is what we would consider an overdrive. So the SLO circuit. So this particular pedal has been reverse engineered for, let's see, pedalpcb.com. Looks like they have a project for it. And it's quite a bit different. So what you have is a non-inverting gain stage. You have some EQ filtering. The gain control is a little more like what you'd find on an amp. So very cool little thing they did here. And then we have a non-inverting gain stage again. So we're building the gain up, but the diodes, you'll notice there's diodes there, but they're facing each other. And they're not anti-parallel, meaning one pointing that way, one pointing this way. The clipping there is actually a little bit different, not like a Tube Screamer really at all. It's a little more dynamic, I would say. So it's kind of changes with the voltage and stuff that's going on with that op amp. Really cool thing. More filtering, another gain stage slightly. Then we have a passive 3-band EQ like what you would find on the amp. We have a presence control and the deep controls, a little switch on the side, which increases or decreases some low presence, sort of like a resonance filter in an amp. We have yet some more filtering, and then we have the volume control on the output. If you watch this channel for any length of time, you know I love to bring out the breadboard. If you've never seen this channel before, you're asking yourself, what is a breadboard and why do I care? Well, this is a breadboard. So this here is a circuit that I've built myself. There's no soldering with a breadboard, generally, most of the time. No soldering, you just put pieces in and arrange them in such a way that you can get sound in and out, and you can create circuits very quickly just using a breadboard. This little thing up here just allows me to run a guitar cable in and a guitar cable out with an on and off button, and that basically just allows me to just make a circuit very quickly. And if you like this sort of thing, I'll have a link below. You can check out a course on how to do this sort of stuff. But ultimately, this circuit here is very Tube Screamery looking. So if you look at the schematic, it's going to look like a Tube Screamer for the most part, but I've voiced it completely different. So it sounds nothing like a Tube Screamer. Let's check it out. So again, I'm going to start with the Tube Screamer, then we're going to turn this on. So here's the circuit that I built. Now notice there's no buffer on the input at all. I tried to keep this as simple as possible. So no buffer, but we still have this non-inverting gain stage. Now I did move the diodes, so rather than putting them right here, which you would normally find in like a soft clipping circuit like we saw with most of the other Boss pedals, we're moving that to what would traditionally be more like a hard clipping position. So we have some filtering and clipping going on here after this first gain stage. Now we do have that same Tube Screamer type tone control, but the values are completely, totally different. So this is just barely active, mostly passive, and it's because I'm not taking off near the highs that you would find on a Tube Screamer. And also, whenever I'm boosting that gain up to begin with, I'm adding a little bit more bass into it. So really what I'm trying to do, rather than like filtering everything so it's very narrow and mid-rangey as the volume, as the gain goes up, I'm really kind of spreading those frequencies out. So it's a little more, I hate the word, but a little more transparent, for lack of a better word. A little less mid-focused, I guess you could say. But from there, just simple volume control out, and that's it. Super easy circuit. Looks exactly like a Tube Screamer. Doesn't sound like one at all. So just changing the circuits, even though schematically it looks very similar, changing part values can make two similar looking circuits sound completely different. So when you hear people talk about, are all overdrives the same, there really needs to be a caveat there, because if we're being honest, a Les Paul and a Telecaster basically are the same thing. Pieces of wood with metal strings on it, with pickups, and the pickups pick up the vibrations of the string and send it out the output jack into your amp. So technically they're the same thing, even though they sound completely different. The construction's different, the woods are different, all this stuff that makes the guitar sound and play differently. but technically it's the same thing, right? Same sort of idea with overdrive. So don't get so caught up on whether something is Tube Screamer or not. Because sometimes, like you saw earlier, sometimes they do sound alike. Other times they don't sound anything alike. But you may be wondering, well, are all overdrives based off the Tube Screamer? Not at all. This example right here of the Soldano, this particular one is nothing at all like a Tube Screamer. Multiple op amps, diodes clipping in a different way that we don't usually find in most overdrive pedals. But still, it's a great sounding unit. It's got its own thing. It does a thing. It's different than a Tube Screamer. I love it personally, but I'm also a massive fan of all overdrives. I think there's a place for all this stuff in your arsenal because at the end of the day, all these pedals, all the amps, all the guitars, for a musician, these are all tools to create something cool, right? If you plug into it and it inspires you and you write something just, something that means something to you or someone else, I would say, or just something that makes you have some fun, it's worth it, in my opinion. I'm biased since I make pedals for a living, but still, that's my thoughts. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll catch you next time with a new one.